Utah State as a program, okay, I do want to put some context, not necessarily the program, but to the hiring, right? So Blake Anderson, okay, if you don't know, last summer was canned, right, for allegedly trying to cover up a domestic violence case for one of his student athletes. I don't know all the details. I could have even misspoke in some capacity there, but when you got a female, Diana Sabal, who by the way is kind of a badass as your AD, like that was not gonna fly. He was fired so fast, it was crazy. So, uh, and I do want to talk about like Bronco Mendenhall last year. We were in this spot last year, okay, talking about the best hires, right, in this past offseason. There were two coaches that we gave solid consensus A grades to, or A plus grades, okay? That would be Fran Brown of Syracuse, who won 10 games this year, by the way. No biggie. And Bronco Mendenhall, okay, hiring for New Mexico. And his connections there with Rocky Long, his history at New Mexico. And in his first year, did he get a little lucky that he had a fantastic offensive coordinator hiring and maybe Devin Dampier exceeded all expectations known to mankind? Yeah, obviously. But what he did with that roster after getting decimated, okay, by the transfer portal, on particularly on your offensive line when you had one of the better rushing attacks in college football, right? You got decimated in the transfer portal. And yet, he came back, won 5 games, probably should have won 6 games, right? Should have probably made a bowl game. But that is a big upgrade, right, for New Mexico when they got him and the season that they've had. I'm sure that fan base was ecstatic to see some wins, for a change over there in that program. And he's gone moving on up. Diana Sabal hires Bronco Mendenhall. And by the way, Sabal, I hope I'm saying that right, by the way, she's had some badass hires herself. I mean, just this past year, right? She took over AD in 2023. She had to hire Jared Calhoun as a basketball coach. Uh, yeah, I would say that's working out pretty well for you right now. Okay, maybe you haven't hit on the women's basketball coach hiring that she had, but also her time at Ohio State. Let's talk about the women's hockey program there. Okay, who did she hire? None other than the coach that's won both national championships in that program's history. And look at what Ohio State women's hockey is right now. It would not be where it's at right now without Diana Sabal. She's also very revenue oriented, right? She's very involved in NIL. She's kind of a badass, and I don't know if Utah State fans necessarily agree with me, but like when I look at her resume, I'm like, yeah, she's good. She knows what she's doing. And over here on this show, we believe in Bronco Mendenhall as a coach. The question is, and CD, I'm sure you can get into this more than I can right now, will it work at Utah State?
I believe it will. Absolutely. We talked about it. I mean, for similar reasons why we thought it would work at New Mexico. And now it's interesting, that he was there such a short time because he's a guy that has options, right? And so he obviously picks and chooses his spots wisely. I think he kind of saw the writing on the wall potentially in the Mountain West and his ability to go to Utah State, not only to go in the Mountain West and get a significant pay raise, a significant increase in revenue and buy-in, right, and different things for this program to succeed. They're also moving to the Pac-12, right, in a couple years. Now, we'll see what happens there. Obviously, a lot still has to be figured out for the Pac-12 to become back to the Pac-12, but this is interesting. This is absolutely interesting. So he gets a 6-year contract starting at $2 million annually. That's awesome. Great for Bronco Mendenhall.
Good for Utah State, by the way, being able to shell that out. That's
fully
solid.
Guaranteed 6-year deal. You've got a buyout. That's $3 million after one year, and then it drops $500,000 every year after that. So Utah State's protecting their own butt in case the worst has to happen. I guess not the worst, but a scenario where Bronco Mendenhall has to leave and potentially take a different job. You also have, his staff budget's going to be $3.5 million, which is fantastic. You're looking at some of the bottom teams in the Big Ten, and they're hovering right there around 4.5 million. So that's a great spot to be in. And that let him go out and get some guys in that he wanted on his staff. So obviously the offensive coordinator that was at New Mexico is going over to Utah, bringing over Devon Dampier, which is a great hire for Utah. And obviously Utah State sucks. It sucks that those guys in Salt Lake City are going to take those guys. But the reality is you still got some pretty good things. You're bringing over a guy to be offensive coordinator. His name's Kevin McGivern, and he was a wide receiver coach and passing game coordinator for San Jose State. And you Mountain West fans know they had a hell of a season at wide receiver with Nick Nass and Justin Lockhart. They also changed quarterbacks and did wonders there. He's a Utah native, which is fantastic. He's been at Utah State before. I don't know if it'll work out like Jason Beck did, right? It's interesting because San Jose State fans are like not too bummed about him leaving. Everything that I'm seeing on him, I feel pretty good about it working out. And obviously, Bronco Mendenhall is a guy that like you can trust to kind of crush his hires there. You're also bringing over Nick Howell, right, to be the defense coordinator there. He's been with Mendenhall for a goddamn decade and a half now. He was defense coordinator in New Mexico. While it was not great, right? It was not great at all defensively. But the reality is the talent and all that kind of stuff wasn't there yet. And it got better, I thought, throughout the season, which is coaching and other things that you love to see. Also on the defense side is going to be cornerbacks coach Charles Mack, right? Is his fifth season working with Bronco Mendenhall. He also coached with Nick Howell at New Mexico and at Virginia. He was a guy that developed, right? Former star cornerback, Fentrell Cypress, if you remember him at Virginia, was in the portal, headed up highly coveted, headed up over to Florida State. He was recruited by Nick Howell, developed by Charles Mack. That's a good combo to have there for Utah State. You've also got some other guys that have been with him for a while on the defense side there. So Jan Jorgensen, the outside linebackers coach. You've got the D-line coach, Dante Wilkins, been there before. Special teams coordinator, Shane Hunter, is a guy. I think he's also going to be coaching the linebacker position there. He has been defensive coordinator. He's been a special teams coordinator. He's coached every position on the defense, and he's also been with Mendenhall for about 11 years now. So another guy that he trusts can have on his staff. The offensive side of the ball, you got a little bit more, shake up. Obviously, I talked about McGivern. The O-line coach, Mario Satelli, he's been the offensive coordinator at William and Mary for the past couple of years. You've got a new wide receiver coach, Denarius McGee. He's a guy that was in the NFL, right, with New Orleans and the Houston Texans, was also in college like Montana State, NC State, FAU there as well. And then you've got the tight end coach, Coach Alley. He's been at Utah Tech, and
Is
he's
that
also.
Ali'i Numatolo?
Thank you. You nailed that. So he's there too. And then you got some mainstays with Bronco, familiar faces if you followed Bronco's career with the running back coach Kirk Garner. 5 years work with Mendenhall, was the RB coach at New Mexico, who, by the way, developed and recruited, he got in the transfer portal, Eli Sanders, and they averaged, by the way, like 6.7 yards per carry after losing all his offensive linemen, like you said. Last coach I want to talk about before I go through all that and take a breath here, Matt Johns, right? Quarterback coach. He's been with Mendenhall, was with him Virginia, was with him at New Mexico, and he also played for him back when he was at Virginia. So this staff here is something I love to look into when you see these new hires. That's why we kind of waited a little bit to talk about these, is to wait for these staffs to finalize and be able to dive into them. If I'm Mendenhall, if I'm a Utah State fan here, an Aggie fan, I really like what he did. Obviously, you trusted him. He's an experienced guy to get the right staff, which he wanted in year one. And obviously, he had the budget to do it. $3.5 million, which is big time for him to do that. Yeah, I thought it's fantastic. Obviously, it's a wait and see. Now, just because these guys have been with Mendenhall for a while doesn't mean they're automatic gems and they're just these, 5-star can't miss coaches. But the reality is he's got his guys in his building that he trusts and wants, and I think that's a pretty good sign if you're Utah State.
Yeah, this is a fantastic hire. I'll talk about my grade for this, a little bit later, and we'll get a grade from you as well on this. But in terms of like Utah State's, expectations as a program, okay, I think it's a little bit different right now than maybe it was, 5-10 years ago with the way that this conference is working out, right, with the way that this athletic department's kind of humming right now. With the way that you're able to get a guy like Bronco Mendenhall. Before you've had success, right? Like you've had some success, right? You've had some guys that were pretty highly drafted. You've brought in talent. You've been able to find ways to win games in the Mountain West. But moving forward, okay, uh, this I guess quote unquote Pac-12 Mountain West look, moving forward you're going to be facing, not necessarily different teams than what you're used to, but it's going to be more high quality opponents, right? And when I'm looking at these, uh, you know, athletic departments, right? In this new Pac-12 that's going to initiate in 2026 with Boise State, um, Fresno State, Colorado State, San Diego State, I guess Gonzaga for basketball, Oregon State, Washington State. And I look at these schools and like honestly, like when you look at, the budgets, right, and the enrollment and the potential ceiling, I understand if Utah State fans actually believe that they can compete at a very high level in this conference. I'm actually, I think from an outsider's perspective, might look at these names and be like, okay, well, Utah State and Colorado State are probably the bottom feeders. I don't know that that's necessarily the case moving forward. You got an athletic department that actually probably has, dare I say, more money than, maybe not than San Diego, but you can compete financially with some of these schools. And that surprised me. And I think that moving forward, you got a real shot at this thing. But getting the right coach is a huge first step in that, right? Huge, huge, huge first step, right? Am I wrong in thinking that Utah State can legitimately compete in this new Pac-12 in the 2026 era?
Without a doubt. You talked about how important it was to nail this hire. We talked about it, and we're probably going to talk about it with all these hires too. This is such a pivotal time in college football with the shakeup, with realignment, with even playoff spots potentially on the line too. Like these all matter so much, and one wrong hire can set your program back, right, decades potentially. And obviously, it's more hyperbole and probably worst case scenario, but that's the reality where we're at right now. I don't think it's crazy to say that. I want to talk about how we're getting here because you talked about Utah State competing. This is not long ago that they were 11-3, right? 2021, Blake Anderson had them winning the LA Bowl. They were ranked in the AP poll. You had Logan Bonner playing really well. You had Calvin Tyler for a couple years. The defense was getting after it with interceptions, fumbles, sacks, all that kind of good stuff. Past couple years, with Blake Anderson as the full-time guy in 2022 and 2023, I think you progressed a little bit. You had Logan Bonner getting hurt. You had Cooper Legas coming in and not playing great, in that first kind of season starting, but better in 2023. It didn't really equivalent to more wins in 2022 and 2023. You went 6-7 both those years. And then, obviously 2024, it was interesting because you had the change in coaching staff. You actually lost, a good amount. You had, I think, is it Booth or was it Faison? One of the running backs went over to Mississippi State, and
Booth.
obviously Booth was, and it was pretty good there. That's a big loss as well. Some other guys. So Nate Drelling was the DC and got promoted to co head coach or interim head coach, excuse me. And you went 4-8, and you competed in a lot of games. I think you got the most out of potentially your offense, right? And some of the quarterback positions. Spencer Petras, a guy that was kicked out of Iowa. Basically, you got Bryson Barnes, who was running out of Utah as well, and those guys came in and honestly played well. Petras was good until he got hurt, and Bryson Barnes came in, a couple games where you beat San Diego State, right, and you almost beat a good Colorado State team, right, and he had over 300 some yards in those games, and yeah, it's very interesting, and I think there's some pieces here to build on, right, and obviously you got some guys going to the NFL, and the portal, blah blah blah. I get that, but you're in a spot here that you can compete, I think, not only in the Pac-12 in the future when Mendenhall has this program going, but I think even in 2025 and in the short term as well.
Yeah, you do. And now things have changed, right, with the transfer portal. But I do think, and Bronco Mendenhall has been great at developing talent. I do think that there is an opportunity geographically, sneakily. You're not necessarily dead in the water, right, compared to those California teams. I know that there's more fertile recruiting grounds per se for those California teams, and Boise State has that historical factor, the success, storied program factor. But I don't think it's crazy to say that Utah State hasn't necessarily recruited at the top level of the Mountain West for quite some time now, but I don't think that means that they can't, if that makes sense. But that also means that they don't have to be the top recruiting team in that conference to have success moving forward. And I think Bronco Mendenhall being there, right, and it sounds like he's got his guys in there. I'm not sure how a lot of the staff is recruiting. I'm sure that there are some Utah State fans that could give us some more clarity based on that. But I do think moving forward, you do need to like recruit a little bit better in order to,
Yeah.
make sure that your floor of your team, talent wise, is going to be able to compete with these guys. And then a coach like Bronco Mendenhall is what elevates that, right? And, you don't always need that. Like I've been critical, at times of Matt Campbell at Iowa State, right? But the reality is, he just hires great coaching staffs year after year, and they've established a culture that wins, right? Which is different than what we've seen from Iowa State in past years, when the floor of that talent isn't necessarily super high, but the coaching staff is able to elevate it. If you can raise the floor of this talent in this program, you're the sky's the limit. You can make the college football playoffs legitimately. It is not crazy to think that with Bronco Mendenhall at coach, you could do that. Is that going to happen year one? No. Is that going to happen year two? Probably not, right? But doesn't mean that this is a bad hire. I'll give you my grade for this hire. Okay,
Wait, real quick, can I say one more thing before we get into
you got it.
grades? It is you mentioned that I do think it's interesting because unfortunately you've had some conference realignment I think turn in the negative in terms of other teams going to other spots in your state, right? BYU going to the Big 12, becoming Power 4 and having a heck of a season, right? Utah going to the Big 12 as well, and obviously in what the success they've had in the Pac-12, and I guess decade or two ago they moved into the Pac-12. So I think that's something to think about too in terms of those recent events. I think have pushed you a little bit below, where you were as opposed to 10, 20 years ago with those other programs. But the reality is, like you said, I think there's opportunity, especially in the talent. And there's honestly good talent over there in the Mountain West, for them to have that. And then last
Yeah,
thing too here about reasons why Mendenhall is at Utah State more specifically. Um, so he's native to Utah, right? And he's Alpine native. He wanted to be closer, I think, to his 93-year-old mother, Lenore, who still lives in northern Utah, right? So I think that's part of it too, in terms of opportunity and accessibility to his family as well. And that's a big thing for him as well. And also reasons why you could see him stay there longer. And I think we have confidence in him staying there longer than he was at New Mexico.
for sure. I agree with that. I did not know that bit right there. That is very solid to think about. Let me give you my grade for this, all right? And this has to do with a lot of things, right? And it's funny because this is the first coaching grade that we're going to give out, and I don't normally give out like this kind of grade, right? I'm giving it a flat A. I mean, like what better hire could you have realistically hired for Utah State, right? That's just legitimately better than this one. I don't know that there is one, right? So for that reason, I'm like, yeah, this is you got a guy who's been in that geography. He's coached in the Mountain West. He is a great coach. He's elevated talent. He's hired a great staff. The athletic department's on the up and up, right? I can't think of a lot of better options that you could have gotten. And you went and snagged Bronco Mendenhall. And when that happened, I was like, holy cow, what a great hire. I thought Bronco Mendenhall might go somewhere bigger, right? I thought he might go somewhere bigger. I really, really, really like this hire. So much so, I'm giving him the same grade. I'm giving him the A, the same grade that I gave New Mexico for hiring him at this time last year.
Without a doubt, too. And I think it speaks to your point earlier about Utah State being able to compete right in the new Pac-12 potentially, in the fact that we all assumed Mendenhall, if he were to leave, it would be a step up. And the reality is, and I think this is proof, is that Utah State is a step up. Utah State is a very good job. And for that, right, this is an A as well for me. Like you said, you can't get much better than this. I think realistically, I think a guy that also, for all the reasons you said, geography, success, all that good stuff. And it's also great to see the buy-in and everything around him, right? Not only the fact that you can bring him in, but what that actually means, right? Logistically in the alignment of your administration, being committed to going out and getting a guy like Bronco Mendenhall means so much for this program. And obviously, it doesn't guarantee you wins at all, but it puts you in a damn good spot to be able to produce that at that level that you want to be. Yeah, this is fantastic. I'm really excited. Very bummed for New Mexico because that was a fun hire. I thought he would do fun things, especially if he.
Great fit.
Yeah,
great fit.
Yeah, it would have been awesome. But the reality is, obviously, wherever he goes, it's you might as well plug and paste is freaking A, because we are really supremely confident in him and what he can do. And the reality is he doesn't waste his time either. This is not him, I'm just gonna go and just fiddle around there and in the Mountain West and at Utah State. This is where he wants to be, and I think that speaks a lot about Mendenhall. And even though we said similar things about New Mexico, this is different, right? For all the reasons we talked about earlier, with him being native to Utah, with the writing on the wall in terms of realignment and all that kind of stuff. And this is a big deal for Utah State.
Yeah, I will say their draw next year in the Mountain West schedule, you do draw Fresno State, you do draw UNLV without Barry Odom though. You do draw Boise State, you do draw Colorado State on the like. I don't know. It's I guess the only team that you're missing on your schedule. Wait, oh, sorry, I'm totally looking at.
You looking at New Mexico's?
No, I was looking at a different sport. I was like, wait, is that? I was like counting them up. I'm like, oh my gosh, is that every single Mountain West team? I was like, how do
Oh,
they play every single Mountain West team? Sorry. I, I have it right here. All right. Okay, you do play UNLV, Boise State. You do play Air Force, but you get them at home, right? And you do play Fresno State. So actually, I was right about all those things I said. And you do play San Jose State, but you get them at home. So
yeah. What do you like to say? You say never wrong, just early. That's what it was right
yeah,
there. Uh, in terms of right, we gave it an A, right, and so that means he's going to meet and exceed his expectations, correct? And the expectations of Utah State, and I don't know if you went through those earlier, right? It's obviously what number one, make bowl games, right? They've been in 11 bowl games in the last 14 years, right? You're gonna want to beat your rivals, right? You win the Bridgers right the Bridgers Rifle Trophy, right, with Wyoming. That's awesome there. And then we talked about them competing in the new Pac-12, right? You don't have to be the favorites every year, but damn it, you can absolutely pop, and you should be right in that middle to top half, and honestly be competing for some kind of playoff spots. If this hits like an A, like we think it will not be crazy to see Utah State in November being like, yeah, if certain things break their way or they win some games that they're playing or remaining on their schedule, they're right there for a playoff opportunity. Is that crazy to say in terms of his expectations at Utah State?
no, it's not crazy to say. And look, he may never right reach the college football playoffs and still quite exceed anyone's expectations and our expectations, right? So, uh, yeah, this is. I think this is an obvious A. I'm not sure. I don't know. Let us know in the comments if this is how you guys feel. You Utah State fans, you New Mexico fans, you Mountain West fans. I don't know. If I was an opponent of Utah State to the Mountain West, I'd be like, man, that was a good hire. Man, that was a good hire.
Yeah, you
You
just
know.
asked New Mexico exactly how they're feeling losing him. And the reality too is, and this is my last thing. I know we've been going on Bronco Mendenhall, which we love to do, right? Um, if right Utah State, let's call it like it is, right? It's not a stepping stone job, but it is. There are a lot of better jobs in college football, in the sport of football in general. You've got the NFL, and you've got the Big Ten, the SEC, and obviously the Big 12 and the ACC as well. The reality is if Bronco Mendenhall stays there for a couple years, succeeds, and then leaves, that's not a bad thing, right? It's not. Look at Boise State. Look at Fresno State. Look at other schools, right, who have had James Madison, who have had success with coaches, right? It sucks that you're going to have to do it all over again potentially and nail your coaching hires and continue to nail them. But it's a good problem to have. And I'm going to say this in a lot of our G5 videos about our coaching hires is this is not a failure if he leaves in 3 years to take a higher job, right? That's a good problem to have. That is absolutely a good problem to have. That means he is leaving it in a better spot than he found it. And then you can go up and hire an even better coach potentially and go out and get another guy and have more buying and funding and putting yourself up in spots to continue to succeed at the level, if not a higher level than you were before, right? You've seen Utah do it for a while. You've seen Boise State, all these other G4, G5 schools, right, who have turnover at the head coaching spot. Look at Cincinnati, right? And they ran through a bunch of coaches and eventually got them in a spot where they moved up a conference to the Big 12, right? And yeah, I don't think it's crazy at all. Unfortunately, you don't have to like it, but it's the reality of the situation, and it's also it's not a failure, right? If he does
No,
end up leaving, that's my last thing there.